Good morning and welcome. I'm Kate Bulkley. I am an independent media journalist based in the UK, and I'm here to run two back-to-back sessions, actually, in this Digital Comes of Age slot that we're having this morning. So thank you for coming. This first session, I think, is going to be really interesting. We all know that tracking what people are watching, where they're watching it, when they're watching it, how they're watching it, which device they're watching it on, is becoming increasingly important as we see this, explosion in tablet use, smartphones, VOD, delayed watching, all these kind of things. Pretty soon we'll see it on our microwaves in the morning. Who knows where it's going to show up next, television. Nielsen is obviously a global measurement company that we're all very, very familiar with. They watch all of this with great interest. They're starting to get much more involved in all of these new platforms. You might have noticed yesterday's news that Nielsen actually published their first Nielsen Twitter TV ratings, which I thought was interesting. That's for the US only. But the results of that, which I'm sure you've read about if you've turned on your smartphones, is that what's top in Twitter isn't necessarily top in what we would consider the top shows that are watching on television. So there's a slight disconnect there, which is interesting. Gives us more information, but also doesn't answer some questions. I think all of this is really necessary to help us understand better what our audience is doing and how, of course, better to monetize that audience. So obviously this is of keen interest to all of us in the television business. So in this first part of this doubleheader session, we're going to look at what Nielsen's doing, and we're thrilled to have Dounia Turrill, who is the SVP of Client Insights for Nielsen. Now, Dounia's interesting because she lives in LA. She's lived in America for almost 20 years, but she's French. She grew up in the UK, so she obviously has, an understanding of the international market. So she's going to give us sort of what Nielsen's doing in terms of cross-platform audience measurement, where they are, how they're doing it, what their thinking is, and sort of the new stuff that's coming. So could you please warmly welcome Dounia Turrill. Hi. Do you want to stand there?
Yes, I will
good.
stand
There's your
there.
clicker.
I was told there was a big screen and I might knock my head coming up, so I thought that would be a bad introduction to the morning. Welcome, everyone. I can't actually see anyone except the first few rows, so hopefully this will be engaging enough to keep your attention. Definitely an evolving world, a changing world. No boundary, no borders, no limits, getting ahead of the Windows game. Really, understanding what that means in the context of an ever-changing, ever-evolving media landscape. When we think about this, we really need to think about kind of where we came from, where we're heading. At the end of the day, though, I do tend to think it's about following the consumer, following the viewer, and making sure kind of this deep understanding of that viewer follows. So let's take a look, and some of these slides are not that fancy. We are a measurement company. So, you look at the evolution and the proliferation of devices and platforms on which to receive content, and you see really a vastly different landscape. Certainly, I'm not going to talk about the 1950s, 60s, but over the past decade, we've really seen a shift and an ability to control the diffusion of content and information across different devices. Portable devices enable this connection anytime, anywhere. They really allow the consumer to make that decision, that entry point decision. Certainly, this is far from unique to the US, and we can see this phenomenon happening across the board, and it's really moving very quickly. Proliferation has made it very important, some challenges, but at the same time easier to open up audiences to distributors who are looking for that connection point. Today's consumer isn't confined by this linear landscape where they have to watch at the time they're watching, at the time that the program airs. So the media universe, and certainly don't get bogged down in the details of this slide, but as you can see, there's really an increased opportunity to move kind of across devices, across time. You have social media and access to online, which is really opening up these borders, right? And giving access to content across the globe. How many of you have connections, not just in your country of origin, but across boundaries? And so as content providers and distributors see this evolving landscape, they certainly have to think, oh, is it moving without me doing anything? All right. So you get really ahead of everything. I got to keep track of that. But anyway, as more and more content is delivered through legitimate channels, you also have questions of piracy. And piracy is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, obviously, it cannibalizes audiences. On the other hand, it really allows for the ability to gain that exposure. And certainly for people who are looking for a more legitimate way to get their content, it might have triggered that social conversation that will bring them to the screen, to the content. Game of Thrones, as an example, is, I believe, at the moment, the most pirated show globally. And really, the producers and HBO have in a way embraced it. They might say something different, so I don't mean to speak for them. But it really changes the dynamic conversation of the window concept of shows. And it really does create that additional opportunity to access content. In the US, shows definitely leverage that social element. And as Kate mentioned, yesterday we released some data, first ever Nielsen Twitter TV ratings. And we're really starting to look at and try to understand the relationship, whether it's a causation, how the two are linked. And certainly some of the findings suggest that the top tweeted about shows are not necessarily the top watched shows. But as you think about this increased proliferation of devices and content and access, you have to think that different people are using these differently. And so the people who tweet about shows create this conversation, and then really it's a word of mouth concept on steroids. And certainly word of mouth is not new in the least bit. I think I've spoken to most of these points in terms of the new norm for consumer media consumption. You have an explosion of choice, video on demand, viewing on demand, whether it's the ability to record a show to watch it when you want, whether it's the availability of video on demand as provided to you by content providers, by distributors, and we go back. Time shifting, consumers, really kind of engaging more and more across the day, looking for information and content. And certainly, in terms of windowing, the opportunities across the channels to reach the consumer across markets is phenomenal, and I think something that can be easily and should be leveraged. So here, just a couple of fun facts, which now you've seen a couple of times. But the daily person, and certainly this is true in the US, spends the vast majority of their time watching content on television. And this idea that content, that TV is a dying phenomenon is really misleading, because really everything that's delivered to you is delivered on different devices, and one of the devices is the TV set. And people make choices across the day, and so portability of mobile devices, of tablets, of smartphones, allow you to, start your day in your kitchen, where you might have a tablet that's authenticated to your service provider but not connected to your television. You might walk out and get on a train, although I always say I live in Los Angeles, I shouldn't walk out and continue to watch content in my car. There's no other means to get anywhere in LA than by car, apparently. But people do that, and at the same time, so you have ESPN allows you to follow games. We're in the middle of the World Series in the US, and I'm sure we'll see a lot of data come back on how people are using and how people are watching throughout the day on their mobile devices. However, they come home, they sit down, and they'll turn that screen, that TV screen on. And so, these devices, I like to say, expand the day, expand the opportunities, and don't really contract people's ability to really embrace and engage with the content. So now, this is true. Let's see, DVRs, digital video recorders, some shows really gain a lot of viewing via DVR homes, recorded, people go home, they play them back whenever, wherever they want. So that's a huge benefit. In terms of time spent watching video on a computer, this is kind of an interesting factoid because fewer people are doing it on the computer. And what this suggests is not necessarily that watching online has diminished, but really that the proliferation and increase in penetration of mobile devices and tablets just have created another device on which to follow that content. In terms of video on demand has been around for a long time. In the US, it's been around for a decade. And yet it's only in the past year or so that content providers have really embraced video on demand and embrace the ability to show either recently telecast episodes of shows or put up multiple episodes of shows for the consumer to watch at their leisure. And that's been very positive. That's been a way. I'm not going to start dancing. That's been, sorry, VOD. That's been another way to bring the audience in. So this slide, and I'll just talk to it. Again, it's going back to the idea of, how much our media consumption has expanded over time and how great an opportunity there is. Okay, I'll go back to that slide. Sorry. Oh, you're not seeing. Can we get the last slide up again? I'm not sure. Anyway, in 2001, 2002, what you had is really, when a show aired in the US, you got to watch it. You got to watch it live. If you had a video tape player, you could record it and watch it later in the week. Or you'd have to wait for a repeat to come later in the season, or catch it on DVD and syndication. And the world is really different now. And what we see is that audiences are additive. And so creating a vast opportunity, right, for content providers, for distributors. In terms of, last season's airing of The Following, you can see the buildup of the audience. So getting ahead of the Windows games, kind of to wrap it up, is about understanding your consumer, where they are, where the opportunity lies to engage with your consumer, and accepting the concept and the knowledge that people do catch up on shows and they do have this multiple entry point for exposure allows you to really turn what you might see as a challenge into a phenomenal opportunity. consumers love to be entertained. They'll find the content wherever you put it, and so really it's up to you to take it and use all the tools at your disposal, the social media outlets, these increased platforms where viewers are catching up on shows. Use them to your advantage to really get audiences triggered and excited about new shows.
Cool.
So there.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Come and join me over here.
Welcome.
We've got a few minutes, so let's just do a few questions.
Okay.
I mean, I guess the Twitter thing that happened yesterday I thought was really interesting. You know, this Nielsen Twitter TV ratings, basically trying to track Twitter and you know what the viewership, or is it helping tune in and all this kind of stuff. And yet the numbers were stunning in the differences. In other words, things that were in the top 10 TV shows based on the regular Nielsen were not in the top 10 Twitter. So how is it going to help us?
Well, I think it just helps understand how different audiences are connecting to shows. And television, you know, television measurement is certainly not in its infancy and is a very established model, and so you get that mass reach. At the same time, social really enables a different type of conversation with a different audience. And so, you know, how does one impact the other? It's a little chicken and egg. But hopefully it does create an opportunity for other audiences who are not watching it on television to become engaged, to turn around and say, you know, this is something cool. I might want to watch it. And so it's you kind of have to follow it over time, right, and see how it evolves.
So Facebook was here yesterday, or is here this market, and they are making a big move into hashtags as well. They're sort of playing catch up, it seems to me, with Twitter. Obviously, they're going to have hashtags and everything, but including TV shows. Are you going to get into tracking what Facebook is doing as well? Well,
you know, certainly as measurement opportunities come up, that's a space that we really live in. And so certainly if opportunities arise, that's something we would do. We work currently with Facebook for our online campaign ratings, which is in the US certainly a accredited gold standard for online measurement of not only campaigns, but we're putting out digital program ratings as well. And there we have a very close relationship with Facebook to provide us data. It's funny to hear you say that Facebook's catching up on anything.
I know, because they're so big. But
yeah.
They sort of dropped the hashtag ball. I mean, hashtags have kind of gone crazy, right?
Yeah, I think they leverage their like, and so now they're entering a slightly different field. So it'll be interesting to see.
It will be. How about getting the money to move over into this new stuff? I mean, one of the issues has been that, you know, TV obviously still dominates most viewing, but the amount of viewing that's happening, particularly among certain demos on other devices, and that's not really being tracked, let's say not being appreciated to the extent that some of us think it should be by the agencies. When do you think that's going to happen? When are the agencies going to actually take the stuff on board and move some of that money?
Well, you know, we believe wholeheartedly that, you know, measurement enables monetization. And so to the extent that we're able to provide the measurement tools to the agencies, to the content providers, the distributors, the advertisers themselves, then they'll be able to integrate it. Obviously, in terms of how that is transacted, how money gets moved around and negotiated, it's really that conversation happens between the agencies and the content providers. But at Nielsen, you know, we believe very strongly, and we're moving very fast in measurement, and we believe if measurement is there, then monetization is enabled.
That will follow. How about international? Obviously, this Twitter thing is just the U.S. You know, obviously, there's a lot of other markets: UK, France, Germany. Everybody would like to know how to track this stuff. When are you going to start launching these products overseas?
Well, certainly our focus has been to launch the products in the US, but just as online campaign ratings launched in the US and then moved to more international markets, if there's an opportunity to work in different markets with the Twitter TV ratings, that is something that we'll be looking at.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I have 51 seconds according to this.
Goodness.
Is there one question from the audience that I can take? Somebody have a burning question that they're desperate to know from Nielsen? No? Nobody say? Evan does.
Goodness.
Can you give Evan a mic? Evan's coming up later to talk to us on stage, but let's hear what Evan, what's your question, Evan?
I looked at
Evan
the Twitter.
Shapiro from Pivot, yeah.
Thanks. The Twitter information that came out yesterday was interesting. And you said there's not necessarily a direct correlation between the most tweeted and the most viewed, but
Well, there's a correlation, but it's not,
direct.
direct.
But do you think that Twitter, and I think it was, you used Grey's Anatomy as an example, so there were 93,000 people tweeting about it, but they tweeted 200 and some odd thousand times. Does that show a level of engagement that perhaps is a differentiator? So does a show, even though it may be a small show, the amount of tweeting that goes on about it, does it show a different level of engagement than a maybe massively watched show that doesn't have that kind of following?
And how does that monetize better, or what does that mean? Deep engagement.
Certainly talk about a monetization conversation. Engagement is a huge piece of the conversation. And as audiences, tweet about shows or retweet or the conversation explodes, this word of mouth on steroids I talked about, that does create an engagement. And to the point that it's an engagement with a different audience, then you have to see, how then is that audience translating its conversation into viewership? Mm-hmm. And, where are they going to be looking for that content? And certainly if it's a younger demographic, they might not necessarily go to the TV set, right, for the content, but they might go to their portable devices.
It was something, you did the Twitter causation study, was that you? That was
Yes.
Nielsen, right? And that was this summer, and it was something about 29% of them, it actually influences what they watch if they're tweeting about it. In other words, there isn't a direct correlation just because you're on the tweets or you're involved with the tweets at the end you tune in, right? I mean, there's a bit of, we don't really know exactly what the direct line is.
There's certainly, there's definitely a correlation,
Mm-hmm.
and there is a certain amount of causality where, tweets will generate viewing. Certainly, you look
Reality
to a
shows.
network. Well,
Yeah.
Reality shows, you look to a network like ABC did a lot of marketing around Scandal, and certainly in everything they talk about and what they've been able to look at, they would, I think, say that they have seen an increased viewership by the exposure on Twitter and by the engagement of the audience, of a new audience who gets to interact with the show, with the characters, but also bringing the actors in to have that one-on-one conversation with the consumer. Because the consumer, at the end of the day, they want to be engaged with, and it's a very honest way to engage with them. It's a very direct way. Mm-hmm. But engagement is obviously key, a key piece of monetization measurement.
Okay, I think we have to wrap this up, but that's just been really interesting. I mean, what you guys are doing is really, really important to this environment, so I think we're all looking forward to seeing these products internationally and getting some of this stuff, some of the granularity to come out. So could you please join me in thanking Dounia Turrill.
Thank you.
Now, if you want to talk to her, she's going to be doing one of those meet the speakers right outside. So if you would like to talk to her, please go outside and do that. There's going to be a 10-minute break. And then we're going to come back, and we have 3 speakers in a row. So if you want to come back for that, it'll be very interesting about distribution in Windows and things like that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.